Okay. All right, so I'm going to lead off. I'm Aaron Levin. I am by trade a writer about science and medicine, but in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of writing about indigenous agriculture and food in the Americas. My last main article was about restoring Hawaiian traditional agriculture. So I'm very interested in agriculture and everything that's surrounds it, including the issues of climate. So I'm going to start off, and then Stuart, and I don't know, Stuart, if you want to introduce yourself right now.
I'm Stu Schoenfeld, and I'm a retired sociologist, and I got interested in environmental issues in the Middle East through contact with the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies in Israel, and that meant broadening the frame from looking just at Israeli issues, but looking at regional issues and the way in which they impact the entire Eastern Mediterranean. So Aaron, back to you.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to pull up some slides here. And let's see. I have to tell this to play. Hold on. There we go. All right. Can you see what I see on my screen, which is a map?
Yes.
Okay, good. And you can hear me, so that's good news. All right. Well, let me start off. So the map shown here is the famous Fertile Crescent, which we all learned about back in school many, many years ago. It basically is parts of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan. Some people include the Nile Valley in Egypt as well. I think about the area that we're talking about, and specifically that is Israel, not only as a destination, but also as a bridge between Africa and Asia. And very recently, they were revealed that there were human finds, pre-human finds, dating back as early as 1.5 million years, found in the Upper Jordan Valley. So we know that for 1.5 million years, people have been walking along this way and having various effects on the landscape around them. Let's see. Why aren't you working here? Hold on a second. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Okay. So geographically in Israel itself, there are a number of geographic regions. And the same can be said farther up and down the coast as well. So what you have are the coastal plain to your left, a mountain ridge in the center, Negev Desert in the south, the Jordan Valley and the associated Jezreel Valley in the north. And there's also the east bank of the Jordan, and which slopes away to the Arabian Desert, far off to the east. What this means is that there are a tremendous number of different ecological niches. And there's also variations in altitude, temperature, rainfall, vegetation. So there's a lot of kind of different locations for various crops and for any number of plants geographically. The Israeli government counts 15 agricultural regions within the country, just to give you an idea. There's another map of the Fertile Crescent. So the origins of agriculture in the Near East lie in this region. Now, there are many other areas in the world where agriculture began. It didn't only begin here, but certainly in East Asia, South Asia, in the Americas and Sub-Saharan Africa, were all centers of origin for various crops. But in this area, we see a number of the basic crops that have, kind of formed the core of our diet. This did not happen all at once. It wasn't like somebody threw a switch and suddenly we had agriculture. The transition must have begun as people returned year after year to stands of wild grain or legumes to harvest them. I think people probably understood pretty early on that how seeds grew into plants. They probably had a basic understanding of that. What you see here is barley. In the Near East, we see 8 major crops that are associated with the region. There's 2 kinds of wheat, einkorn and emmer, barley, lentils, peas, chickpeas, bitter vetch, which is usually used as animal fodder, and flax. So, as I said, this took place over a long period of time, and it probably sort of happened in fits and starts. That is, there were crops that were domesticated, and then they were sort of lost to domestication, and then they were re-domesticated by other people. The same crop might have been domesticated in several different places. As I said, it's not a simple on or off situation. Let's see. For some reason, why is this not working? Okay, so this gives you just a quick idea of the descent from 500,000 years ago to 10,000 when we start getting domesticated versions of different wheats, of emmer in this case, and through various interbreedings with something called goat grass, we end up with modern wheats today, which are bread wheat, macaroni, or durum wheat. It's used in pasta. But einkorn and emmer are still grown, and there are also a couple of other minor variations. This will just give you a different sense of what they look like. One of the things about wild crops, there is still wild wheat in the world. And these are locations within Israel where wild emmer has been located. This is not just a curiosity. This is actually very useful stuff. These wild crops have been growing there for thousands of years. They've adapted to all sorts of changes in temperature, rainfall, salinity, things like that. And they probably have within their genetic code useful things that can be adapted into modern wheat as we face a period of climate change. And so wheat researchers in Israel told me that once upon a time they were told not to get interested in wild emmer. And then all of a sudden it became very important. So they decided it was important. So now they are in fact looking very carefully at wild versions and trying to crossbreed them with modern wheat. So the other list to talk about is not one of those founder crops, but it was actually a purely Mediterranean tree originally. That, of course, is the olive. Olives were native to the shores of the Mediterranean. They have found pits of wild olives at a site called Ohala, which is on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And those date back 30,000 years. That's way before the origins of agriculture. But people were eating olives 30,000 years ago. Olives were first cultivated in what is now Israel and Jordan about 6,500 years ago, and then eventually spread to Italy, Spain, Turkey in the ensuing millennia. What I find interesting is that we have a mention of the olive and many other trees and many other crops in the commentaries, because the Tanakh really represents a reflection of a truly agrarian society. And we might forget that from time to time, but we're often reminded when we read through it. So here it says, when you beat down the fruit of your olive trees, do not go over the trees again, those shall belong to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And when we say beat down, this is literally how it's done. This was taken in the Galilee about 5 years ago. And you see a man with a stick and he's whacking the branches of the olive tree, knocking the olives to the ground where there's a cloth that collected. Obviously, if there were any left over, those would be left for the poor and the fatherless. The other thing that's interesting to me is that same thought, the idea that part of the crops would go to the poor and the needy is expressed again and again, first in not only in olives, but with regard to grain and with grapes. So it's repeated again and again every year. So let me figure out. The interaction of humans with climate change is nothing new. There's a good deal of research going on now, which discusses how even the earliest days of agriculture resulted in changes which were actually affecting the atmosphere. So when you cut down trees or you work the soil, you begin releasing carbon into the atmosphere, can add to soil runoff. In the Far East, or rotting vegetation in paddy rice, wet rice raising, can produce methane. And of course, as the population of the planet increased and there was more agriculture, again, there was more alteration in the Earth's surface and in the Earth's atmosphere. Obviously, that was relatively light compared to, the past century or so, but nevertheless, you can make a good step again along. The water, and I think Stuart's going to get into this in a little more detail, but water in Israel and the West Bank and Jordan is very much dependent on the rainfall that contributes to the flow in the Jordan River. This is a shot of the Committe. This was 5 years ago. It was everything you see in the foreground was once covered by water. And this was after an extended period of drought, which I believe has ended, or at least partly ended now. But it shows you how variable the rainfall can be and how dependent it is on the usage. Israel, Syria, and Jordan all drew water from the Jordan River or its tributaries. And so that also contributed to the low water levels here. There is, I believe, now a water sharing agreement with Jordan, which is supposed to be regulated. So how did traditional farmers adapt to uncertain rainfall? Some places it was possible to irrigate. And when you had constant sources of water flowing in river valleys, like in the Nile or in Mesopotamia, in a lot of places in Israel, in the hill country, you can very often see terraces on the hillsides or on the valley slopes, which were designed to catch water. Wells were dug into the seasonal wadis, into the limestone, which trapped water. How does climate change affect agriculture? Well, warming reduces crop yield and nutrient content. It's, it seems counterintuitive because we know that crops grow very well in the summertime. Well, the warm weather can actually be not so good for wheat and other grain crops. So warming reduces crop yields and nutrients, increases the effects of pests and disease. It alters pollinating and harvest times, which have other problems, and that all has an economic and social effects on farmers. One study of wild emmer wheat in Israel between 1980 and 2008 found that a warmer, drier climate shortened the growth period, and led to reduced grain yield. So they're finding this even within that short period of time. So the Israeli government has found significant warming all over the country. Temperatures are higher in the west compared to the east and the north. Since 2000, there's been a decrease in the average rainfall in the north and an increase in the average rainfall in the south. These are changes of historical patterns, and also an increase in the volume and intensity of rainstorms, which we also have here. Global warming is contributing to a rise in the Mediterranean sea level, 10 millimeters a year. That means an inch every 2.5 years. This is going on all around the Mediterranean, and that change will ultimately affect the entire coastline of Israel. The sea, the edge of the sea will work its way eastward. And what's probably even more, insidious is the saltwater infiltration will work its way into the coastal aquifer, and that will have, create problems for both drinking water supply, and agriculture. One Israeli researcher recently suggested that it looks like Israeli agriculture may shift to greenhouse and irrigated crops rather than open field and rain-fed agriculture. I want to conclude by just to give you a little sense of traditional agriculture and what it was like. This is Abdul Karim El Sana. He's a Bedouin in the Negev. I'm just going to take a couple minutes and read what he told me back then. I talked to him about the agriculture that he did in his region. And he said, we lived in Lakia before it was actually built up. It was in this area, but everyone lived in their own tents. In the summer, we prepared the land for agriculture. We didn't have tractors and we didn't have cars. We used horses and camels to do our farm work. Camels are much stronger and more patient than horses. We attached plows to the camels to prepare the land before the first rains would come. The plow had only one blade. We would decide where we would plant the wheat, where the barley, where the corn, where the watermelon, and where the tomatoes, and so on. Parts of the land were richer than other parts, and we would prepare dams to catch the water. On the richer land, we would plant the watermelons and tomatoes and vegetables. We would plant watermelons and tomatoes in March. We could grow vegetables and fruit from March till November. Barley is not a very sensitive grain. So after the first rain, we would plow, we would sow it, and then we wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Wheat, we had to plow twice. Each time you plow, the land is able to absorb more water. We sowed the wheat seeds by hand. We would plow twice before and again, twice again between the rows after we sowed it. The camel would walk between the rows. The way the camel's feet are built, he could actually step on a plant without causing any damage. The barley dries in April and they pick it by hand. We loaded the camel with everything that we picked. If you saw a mountain walking, that's the camel walking with the barley. So thanks, and if there's any questions, I'll take those.
Why don't I go on, and then we'll take questions at the end or comments. And if people have a thought about questions while at this point or while I'm speaking, you can put them in the chat, and that way they won't be forgotten. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. That looks like it. Let's see. And let's start the slideshow. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to pick up where Aaron left with an emphasis on the impact of climate change on the land of Israel and of the region. And I need to start by saying that I'm going to leave out a lot. There's a great deal that's happening in multiple countries. People are thinking about this. People are suffering from this. And they know that things are changing. But it's a real question about whether the effects of the change can be contained and what the impacts of climate change will be on the region. Okay. So here's where we're going with my part. I want to start with COP27 and talk about the climate change challenge, then look at the political dimension, and then raise the question of what's to be done. Okay, so COP27, COP stands for Conference of the Parties. This is the annual climate change conference that's held by the United Nations. This was founded 27 years ago by the UN with the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it has been holding conferences every year to which all the governments around the world are invited to come because the United Nations recognized that something was happening. As early as 1997, the IPCC scientific report came to the conclusion that climate change was occurring. There were going to be serious impacts, and climate change was most likely due to human effects rather than natural effects. Now that was 1997. That's how long ago? 25 years more. So in the intervening quarter of a century, the warnings from the scientists who are writing reports for the IPCC have become more and more serious until at this point they are saying that we have only limited amount of time to do things to stave off climate change going up beyond 1.5 degrees, which would that's the limit that we think we can tolerate without massive human suffering. Now, at the last COP conference was held in Egypt at Sharm el-Sheikh, and one of the achievements of that was a decision to prioritize loss and damage. What loss and damage means is that the negative effects of climate change are being felt by countries that have not caused it, because climate change is largely the consequence of industrialization, which has been going on since the 19th century. So the countries that were industrializing and burning lots of coal have had an impact on the atmosphere, and countries that were colonial countries that were not industrialized, now that they're independent, are exceedingly vulnerable. So the accomplishment of the last COP COP conference was to set up a fund to compensate those countries. Now, that was an accomplishment, but as the other headline that I've put here indicates, that the other response to COP27 was that while countries have been talking about what they've been doing, they have really not been doing enough. There's been backsliding on commitments, and even the commitments that are made, the scientists tell us, are possibly not enough to avert serious climate change impacts. So there's a fair amount of hand-wringing and worry in the scientific community. And by the way, the next COP, the next conference is being held in Dubai. And the conference chairman is the UAE head of their oil extraction department, which has caused some eyebrows to raise. Okay. So I just put up a few headlines here. You can read them for yourselves that indicate that when we talk about the Eastern Mediterranean as an area which is being seriously impacted by climate change, that this is something that is that I don't have to demonstrate. There's lots of journalism and scientific reports about the impact of climate change in the Eastern Mediterranean. Here, I want to put up just a couple of maps. This is from the World Economic Forum 2019. I couldn't find a more up-to-date map. Now, this map doesn't show the extent of warming. It shows the extent of projected warming. Okay, so you can see that the darker areas are the areas where warming is expected to become more serious. And if you look where we are, interestingly, the United States is projected to be one of the less affected countries by continued warming, and we're feeling it here. So you can imagine what it means in the Eastern Mediterranean, where it's considerably darker. This is another map that shows projected impacts of climate change. The green line shows areas which are expected to increase in drought. So we're seeing for the impact of agriculture is the more extensive drought. And also you can see the darker areas are areas where we're expecting to have more climate change impacts. So here, some other headlines: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan. It's not just Israel, but it's the surrounding countries. The surrounding countries, and the region is one in which water is becoming more and more scarce, and it presents a real challenge. As we will see later, Israel, because it's a coastal country and has their financial resources, has invested in ways to increase its supply of water, but that's not something which is possible, say, for a country like Jordan. Okay. So this, just to pick up on what Aaron was saying about agriculture, this is a map of farming systems across the Middle East and North Africa. Sometimes you'll see maps that refer to an acronym, MENA, MENA. That's a UN designated region which stands for Middle East and North Africa. So this follows that UN designation of a geographic region in the within the world that is identified as one which is studied under that rubric. So the blue shows water sources. The green shows largely rain-fed agriculture, and if you think about what the blue is showing, the dark blue is the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, and as we saw in the previous slide, that's drying up. It's drying up partly, as we'll see, because there is a dam, or actually a couple of dams in Turkey, which are collecting the water in Turkey, and the Turks are not releasing it to the extent that it used to be released. So between the impact of natural changes in rainfall and the limited water that's being allowed through the dams, the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, which provide the water for Iran and Iraq, are increasingly vulnerable. And you can see that in Israel, where the number 3 on the map here, you can see this is largely rain-fed agriculture. And if you have less rain, your rain-fed agriculture is going to be much diminished. Okay, so the World Bank published in 2020 an international hazard warning document where for their banking investors, they needed to know what were the high risks, what were the risks of investing resources in various places. And in Israel, the high hazard risks included drought, extreme heat, and wildfires. And in the West Bank and Gaza, the risks included drought, extreme heat, wildfires, and landslides. I suppose the landslides come from the West Bank being mountainous. So that's just an indication that those who are responsible for investing in the future are aware of the impacts of climate change and the risk that it has for future development. Okay, so this slide is entitled "Not Just Heat." These are some other headlines from recent times that indicate that there are other environmental problems that are partly associated with climate change, partly not. The Mediterranean Sea has become a depository of a great many microplastics. We've seen a growing concern about the effects of microplastics in the water. The Mediterranean is also replete with oil tankers, and there was a serious spill in Israel in February of 2021. The next is a rather sad headline of what the seacoast in Israel looks like. The amount of plastic bags and containers. The next comes from a report on sewage in Gaza, which is really problematic, and then garbage. We'll talk about Lebanon a bit more later, but it's had a garbage collection problem for almost a decade now. So here's a picture of two pictures of plastic waste. The picture on the left just shows a beach with plastic waste, and the picture on the right shows a sea turtle, which is caught in whatever that plastic thing is. And this is Lebanon. On the right, you can see garbage which is left for private collection because the municipal collection isn't happening. Or it happens intermittently, and there have been debates in Lebanon that their landfills are overfull, and the communities near the landfills do not want additional trash put in, and they can't find a community which is willing to accept additional trash. So it's going to places where there's already too much trash, but the government has no other place to put it. The picture on the left shows some of the consequence of having all this trash. This is, you can see scavengers in this pile of unprocessed trash. Okay, so as some of my comments have already indicated, the issue that we're facing is not just an issue of changes in the natural system. There's a political dimension to this. So we can talk in terms of political ecology. And we'll talk about Israel and the West Bank and Gaza in a bit, but let's talk about their neighbors first. Syria is still having a lingering civil war. It's low intensity now. The current government has control over much of the country, but there have been many, many refugees. The civil war started with an agricultural crisis due to a drought in the eastern part of the country. Those who have studied this have concluded that it was not so much the drought that caused the unrest amongst the farmers, but the failure of the governmental water management system. So again, we're seeing that we're looking partly at natural change, but also at the failure of political actors to manage that natural change in a responsible way. Lebanon is politically unstable, had a devastating civil war in 1975. It has not recovered from that. At the moment, the presidency in Lebanon has been vacant for a number of months because the parliament is unable to choose a new president. There is a banking crisis. The Lebanese pound has become virtually worthless, and there is a crisis. And my typing is off here. There's a crisis in government services, in providing energy and collecting garbage, among other things. So it's not a very happy neighbor. Also, Lebanon has been losing population as those who are able to have moved elsewhere. The Iran has been in the news recently because of the women's protests against the government's imposition of political theocratic management of women's bodies, and the way in which they have overreacted to women wanting to uncover at least part of their hair. But there has been previous unrest in Iran about water shortages, about the inadequate management of pollution, and the basic services have come into the control of the military, so that the military is protected by its control of the economy, but the services of the population have become increasingly problematic. Iraq, if you've read the regional news, is also politically unstable, has water management issues. Egypt hosted the last conference on climate change. Despite that, it continues to rely mostly on coal for its energy. The population of Egypt continues to grow, and in order to provide energy for that population, they have to use what their infrastructure is built for. They are expanding their solar capacity, but it's a race between population growth and their ability to transition to the clean energy. They've also had a long-standing dispute with Ethiopia, which built a dam on the Upper Nile, which has been restricting the flow of water into the Lower Nile, on which Egypt traditionally depends. So this is the political dimension of climate change. And if we turn to Israel, according to Yediot Achronot, Israel is the world's leader per capita in plastic waste. If you've been looking at the recent news from Israel, the previous government brought in a plan to eliminate single-use plastics. That's become a very common initiative in the developed world. The new government, which has come in, immediately reversed that because of pressure from the ultra-Orthodox, who find that it's much easier for large families to use disposable plastics, and they consider that a tax on them and not an investment in the welfare of the general public. It has been economically advantageous for Israel to develop natural gas in the Mediterranean, but this is a massive investment, and natural gas is, instead of being phased out in Israel, has become, they've become more reliant upon it. I read a recent interview with the CEO who's in charge of the Leviathan gas field, who projects that they're going to be producing gas for the next 30 to 40 years. And if you ask a climate scientist whether that's a good idea, I think a climate scientist would probably say no. There are many military areas in Israel that are excluded from government regulations. There are pollution issues of waste disposal, and of course there are issues with the administration of West Bank and Gaza. I put some other headlines from reports about the West Bank. The settlements are not just about the numbers of Israelis moving into the West Bank, but the Israelis tend to locate on hilltops, while the Palestinian villages tend to be in the valleys. And without adequate waste disposal infrastructure in many of the settlements, where do you think the wastewater ends up? Okay. In addition, there is transfer of unwanted garbage into the West Bank, and according to the Times of Israel, which is hardly an anti-Zionist source, it is a problem that is, quote, poisoning Palestinians. In Gaza, which has one of the highest birth rates in the world, now is over 2 million people. There's a severe water shortage. The aquifer that they have drawn fresh water from has been largely depleted. The sewage flows into the sea. And while there is there are sewage plants and there is some desalination, the Israeli government has been very wary of construction materials coming in because of the way in which they can be diverted and have been diverted into military uses and used back to attack Israel. In the last operation in 2021, I think it was, of the not only were there military engagements, but much of the sewage and electrical infrastructure in Gaza was damaged. So bad news there too. Okay, so what's to be done then if we look at this partly natural, partly political problem of climate change in the Eastern Mediterranean? One of my colleagues, who is an economist, consistently says that the key to sustainability is providing enough water and enough energy. And if you can do both of those things, then it's possible to develop a reasonable standard of living under conditions of climate change. So those are two key areas of development. We can look at the transition from coal and gas to solar, which is happening in many parts of the country. The desalination story is reasonably well known. I'm not going to go into that in detail for the rest of this, but you can ask about it. And then there's the question of the relationship between Israel and the rest of the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. Can they work together on climate change, and in what ways? There is Israeli-Jordanian cooperation. The Abraham Accords are important, and there are initiatives of regional cooperation. And if we look at the tensions between Israel and the occupied territories, we ask, given the continuing tensions, the way in which they may be tending to flare up again now, is there something that can be done? So lots of questions, okay? Okay, so first, in terms of context, this is a lovely chart. This is from Lazard's, which is an investment house, which shows that as an energy source, solar has become increasingly more competitive, and is now, the yellow line is solar, and you can see that it compares to what's the blue line? The blue line is wind, and that the cost of producing gas is now more, and the cost of producing coal is more. The problem with the transition then is not so much the technology, but with what economists call sunk costs, that so much is already invested in existing coal power plants and in existing gas powered plants. So there's a transition cost, which gets in the way. So here is Kibbutz Keturah, which is in the Negev. This is one of the earliest solar fields that was set up in Israel. You can see the solar field is now as large as the kibbutz itself. This is another solar field in the Negev, and you can see the way in which it supports agriculture. Here is again, we're back at Kibbutz Keturah with the Arava Power Company and Ergia. And Ergia is a company which was created by Yossi Abramowitz, who is known in Israel as Mr. Sunshine. He has been the leading entrepreneur and pusher of the transition to solar, and he is now very busy in African countries, encouraging them to make the transition to solar as a way of jumpstarting their economies. This is the cover of a book by a colleague of mine at Tel Aviv University called his name is Dan Rabinowitz, and here's a picture of him with a promotion of the book tour that he was on. In this book, he is arguing that the deserts of much of the Middle East are not wastelands, but they are potential power sources. That the immense deserts can be used to create large-scale solar farms, and that the Middle East can move from being an oil-based power to being a solar-based power. It's interesting. And independent of Dan Rabinowitz's book, there is a new association in business in the Middle East. This is MESIA, the Middle East Solar Industry Association, which this is the cover of their report from 2023. This is like any other industry association. This is by people who are entrepreneurs in the industry, want to expand the industry, or looking to create collaborative structures to help the industry grow. This is another cover of a recent report. Here they are advertising that they were at the World Future Energy Summit, and they say, come visit us, and we are going to show you how we are going to change the world with solar power. So this is interesting. I've looked at who's involved here, and it tends to be a coalition of the wealthy companies in the Middle East, countries in the Middle East, including the oil-rich countries and European investors. So it's an interesting coalition. So you can see that within the oil-rich countries of the Middle East, there's an awareness that the era of oil is coming to an end, and they are thinking about, what that means for the future of their countries and looking to a different economic future. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to stop pumping oil. So we have both, we have two things happening at the same time. We have continuing contributions to climate change, and then continuing contributions to the transition to a more environmentally friendly form of energy. This is dry land agriculture in Jordan. We haven't talked about that much, but one of the options for agriculture is to move away from rain-fed agriculture to dry land agriculture, and there are certain crops that can be adapted, and there are techniques that can be used to maintain agricultural productivity with less water. One of the things that's happening in Israel, and again, this is one of the things that I've left out of the presentation, is that there is a significant agro-tech part of the economy, that these are companies that are researching ways to use technology to more efficiently produce food, and this is everything from growing cereals to plant-based alternatives to meat. And one of the interesting developments here is the Israeli company that is growing meat in the laboratory from cells, rather than as you get the same meat, but you get it from cells instead of from slaughtering cattle. And one of the rabbinic authorities in Israel has declared that this is parov, which for kosher consumers is very interesting. This is a picture of people involved in an organization which does cross-border environmental work. This is a group called EcoPeace, and you can see the Israeli flag, and then the other two flags are Palestinian and Jordanian. They're in the Jordan River. The Jordan River is a shared waterway with all three entities, and they have argued that rather than be a barrier between them, that the Jordan River can be revived as a center for peaceful relations. They were promoting what they called a blue-green deal for the Middle East, and the blue-green deal is this: that Israel, with its investment in desalinated water, can provide water to Jordan, and in exchange, Jordan has deserts which can be used to build solar installations, and consequently, that can provide energy. So you're trading water for energy, and both sides get what they have less of in return. And you can see that the authors at the bottom are an Israeli author, a Palestinian author, and a Jordanian author. Well, some of you know the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. This was founded in 1996, so it's been around for a while. It has students from Israel and the surrounding countries, and an increasingly larger geographic representation amongst its students. They have research centers. Center for Transboundary Water, for Energy, for Sustainable Agriculture, and they also have what they work on what they call Track 2 environmental diplomacy. Track 1 diplomacy is diplomacy between governments. Track 2 is the relationship between civil society organizations, so that you can bypass some of the things the governments can't do, but you can have NGOs from different countries working together. And so they bring them together to address environmental issues, to see if they can develop plans for environmental cooperation, which they can then lobby their governments to implement. This is their environmental forum, and you can see the working groups on climate change adaptation, off-grid, transboundary renewable energy, and wastewater. Okay. This is Clive Lipkin, who is at the Arva Institute, with a solar-powered water treatment system. So here you get a combination of the use of solar energy to transform water from a septic tank into a machinery of some kind where it is decontaminated, and while you can't drink the water, it becomes suitable for agriculture. This is what is called gray water. So instead of wastewater, which is black water that has to be disposed of, you get water which is usable for irrigation. And this is something even more interesting. This water gen I couldn't believe this when I first saw it. This is a machine which takes water out of the air, that for a process which removes the humidity, this machine allows produces water. So this particular picture is an initiative that the Arab Institute did with a hospital in Gaza, where they were able to provide a solar power installation on their roof, and to use this machinery to provide them with clean drinking water. It's very interesting. Okay, so that's just some ideas about what's being done there. I think now, I'm happy to have any questions, or to have people suggest what we might do here to as part of our response and sense of responsibility to these issues. So maybe first I'll ask Aaron, do you have any comments of?
No, I did see a question from Matt Weinstein about drip irrigation.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentions some politician back in Utah who apparently has just discovered this. But drip irrigation was developed by Israelis in 1959. And as far as I know, the patent holdings are now held by a group of 3 kibbutzim in central Israel. And the company that they run is called Netafim. And you can just look that up on the web, and you can find out what they offer. But it does apparently offer some savings, at least certainly from evaporation, compared to open like flood irrigation or running water down over land past plants, or even in open channels. So yes, it's very effective. It's been used. It's been widely used. It could be used more widely, and it's certainly available. I mean, it's not a new technology. It's you can. I just looked it up right now, and I can see companies that are offering the the piping for that online. So it's definitely out there, and like I said, it's been around for what is that? Close to 60 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Remember
know if
on
Matt
the,
has any other questions.
so going to comment on being on the Beth Am trip to Israel, not the past one, but 2 trips before. They had us planting trees, and it was planting trees along the drip hose. So it would be a drip hose, and that's where we would plant the tree, which is, of course, very smart to do.
Mhm.
I have to say, both of your talks have been fascinating. I really appreciated both of them. It was really interesting. You guys, know something about the subject, and you really put together nice, tight, beautiful slides, very relevant. I was thinking, wow, these guys did a nice job on this. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'd like copies of both of your slides. If I could get a slide deck of both, I'd appreciate it.
I can do that, sure.
Okay, thank you.
So Anne, you had a question?
Arlene, you're muted.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. This has just been fascinating. I'm not a member of Beth Am, but I happened to hear about this through the JUFJ Social Justice Synagogue Roundtable. And I think it's a really, really terrific view into something beyond what we're usually thinking about, and possible solutions, but making it much more, it's real already. But fires in Australia were sort of real because they were, and now they're supremely real because they're here. Things that just bring this home to us in the worldwide environment are really important. I might like to follow up with you also about a possible presentation. But thank you so much. This was just really informative.
Mhm.
Aaron and Stu, I'd asked a question early on, and then I see that Matt Weinstein comment also dovetailed with that. Can you see my question?
Actually, my screen isn't clear enough, so if
Is
you
this
ask the
about-
question.
Is this the one about the Dead Sea, Janet?
Yeah, I've been reading about the rapid shrinking of the Dead Sea attributed to the diversion of the Jordan River for irrigation. There are efforts to save the Dead Sea by introducing desalinated water. And apparently, according to what Matthew wrote, that's going to come from the Red Sea. Do either of you have further information about these efforts and how this likely competes with the demand for desalinated water for agriculture?
Oh, that's a good question. Aaron, if I can answer this, or do you want to make a comment about it?
Why don't you go ahead? I know generally about it, but I don't know any more details. So you go ahead, Stu.
Okay, so the latest information that I have is that Israel will be pumping water into the Sea of Galilee, into the Kinneret, and that the water from the Kinneret will be then used, pumped over into Jordan, or it will reduce the amount that's taken in from Jordan. So this is part of the water agreement with Jordan. The Kinneret is way at the top, and it's not quite the source of the Jordan River, which flows down into the Red Sea, but it's the largest. It's near the top.
Stu, what is
River.
the source of the water being pumped into the Galilee?
This is coming from the desalination plants on the
Okay.
coast of Israel.
Thank you.
I just found I think I just found it today or maybe yesterday. I found it today. An article by Alon Tal and some others, which looks at desalination and population growth in the region. And Alon Tal is an immigrant from the U.S. who became Israel's leading environmentalist. He's an environmental lawyer and was the founder of their association of local environmental groups. They're the national lobby group for environmental issues, and was recently a member of parliament. So what they are projecting here is that the population, Janet, this is getting away from the Dead Sea, I'll get back to it. that the population in Israel will be growing from its current about 9 million to perhaps 15 to 25 million. I've seen other
Wow.
projections of 12 million, but that's still a significant increase, and that the amount of water that will be needed for this many people will require a significant number of additional desalination plants, which will have some other problems associated with them. So, but anyway, the water that's coming, but right now there's a surplus. Right now the desalination plants are producing more water than Israel needs. So they're using that water to provide to Jordan, and some of that is that goes into the Kinneret will make its way down into the Jordan River and into the Dead Sea. I don't know if it's enough to raise the level of the Dead Sea. It has. I was last there a number of years ago, and in the area around in Ein Gedi, which borders on the Dead Sea, the main local road, I think it's road number 9, that was full of potholes, of sinkholes, because of the shrinkage of the supporting water from the Dead Sea. And Ein Gedi was also had date palms, groves of date palms, which were saline resistant, but they were falling over because of the growth of sinkholes. So there was a proposal to pump water from the Dead Sea through from the Red Sea up through Jordan, and then for it to flow into the Dead Sea. And as it would flow into the Dead Sea, it would go through turbines, so you could produce energy this way, and also replenish the water level of the Red Sea. That was designed to be a cooperative project between Israel and Jordan, and then the Palestinians were belatedly brought in because they border on the Dead Sea as well. This was highly contentious. It did not go through in Israel, and the last I saw, the Jordanians were still thinking about it. I'm not sure if they're going through with it or not. So the last I know, that there is no practical solution to replenishing the water in the Dead Sea on the books now. Although I'm not entirely up to date with what Jordan is doing.
So I had 2 questions on your slides. The Lazard, the graph by Lazard of the different costs. I did not see if oil was included in there. Did I miss it, or is oil excluded from that graph?
Let me go back and we'll see. Interesting. Wind, gas, coal, nuclear, solar.
Yeah, but not oil. That's surprising. And another question on slides. The slide showing the irrigated rings in Jordan. In the background, there are some black rectangular areas. Are they solar panels? Solar farm?
That's a good question also. Where's it? Here.
Yeah. Do you see in the middle on the right?
They look also like agricultural fields. They look
Oh,
green to
okay.
me. Yeah.
Ah, oh, okay.
So Stuart, are those center pivot irrigators creating those circles?
I wish, I don't know. Is
But
is the simple
they
answer. But
spray a lot of water into the air, you know. I wonder how much gets lost by evaporation.
I don't, the, um,
You can see in some of the two darker ones that there's like a white line
mhm,
radiating from the center to the out to the circumference.
yeah. Now, Jordan has been very careful about water usage. When I first began to speak to people who were from Jordan, uh, I kept hearing almost as a mantra, Jordan is the most water stressed country in the world. And you speak then over and over and over again, a very common awareness amongst people who think about environmental issues in Jordan. It may be an exaggeration. There may be others that are somewhat more water stressed, but indeed, Jordan is extremely dry and has very limited sources of water. Uh, they put they the government has been uh, uh, very cautious about water planning, very insistent and very methodical about water planning. Uh, for Jordanian governance, and it's also a major issue for Jordanian law enforcement. I look at the Jordan Times every so often, and the Jordan Times periodically will have stories about these many people arrested for water theft. And what that means is that somebody is going to the pipes that are carrying water through their water distribution system and illegally tapping into those pipes, and they find them and they prosecute them. So,
The U.S. should do the same thing in the Colorado River basin.
yeah, that I can't tell you. I don't know about. But the Jordanians all have they have reservoirs, they have canals, they have water, they have irrigated agriculture in the Jordan Valley, and of course, is that part of the reason that the Jordan is dried up is not just the diversion of water to Israel for Israeli purposes, but the use of water for irrigation along the Jordan Valley on the Jordanian side. Uh, there is local produce that requires a significant amount of water. Tomatoes and watermelons, and Aaron can probably add some other crops that from the area that are
Do you think the
intensive.
consciousness level of ordinary citizens is higher than it is in the United States on these issues? And also, do you think the government has a higher level of focus on these issues than here?
I get the impression that amongst the Jordanians it is, because the government keeps talking about it all the time. My impression from reading the Israeli press is because Israel's so divided into fragmented communities that information doesn't necessarily move from one community to another. So parts of Israeli society are very much aware, and parts of Israeli society just are unaware.
Okay.
So I was
Aaron,
wondering.
I have, if nobody else has a question, I have a question. Aaron, I was fascinated by at the end of your talk, the interview with the Bedouin and how they farmed in the past. Would current agricultural scientists say that that is a sustainable and efficient way of producing? And is there a way of, I guess now, trying to adapt and copy some of those old agricultural habits?
I think that's a good question. It's complicated by the fact that when he was younger, he actually had more land to put under cultivation.
Mhm.
And the government has been steadily restricting the amount of land that he can use. And I mean, you know all about this, right? We know the restrictions on Arabs within
Sure.
Israel, and that's where this is. This is not in the West Bank. And he said, and I don't have it on the paper in front of me, I can dig it out, but he did say something that he was once able to, easily feed his extended family, without any trouble. Now, how much it was left over for making money on the outside, I don't know. Probably something. That's usually how those farmers work. But can we learn something from him? I bet there's something in there that we could learn. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not an agronomist by trade, but I'm sure there's something particularly about the timing, the varieties that they're using, to the variety of seeds that they're using, the timing of the planting. In American grain agriculture, there's a lot of extra inputs that come in. There's, you have to plow, you have to plant, you have to fertilize, you have to spray it with weed killer, you have to
Right.
spray it with fungicide, you have to add another layer of fertilizer at a different time. There's a lot of other inputs there, and so he's talking about a time when they probably didn't do much of that at all. They just depended on natural rainfall. So I think there's probably something out there to learn, but I'm probably not the guy to give you the exact answer.
Thank you.
Sure. I'll just add this. I wanted to throw that in because I wanted people to just understand that agriculture is a very different thing under those circumstances than it is, going out to Kansas and watching them plow 3,000 acres at a time. Okay. And we're used to growing up in that kind of an environment where we get our food that way. And here was a way to, obviously it was sustainable. It was sustainable for hundreds or thousands of years, and there's a lesson there. I don't know whether it's a lesson that can be translated into, growing crops, in the modern world, but there might be something, who knows?
Yeah.
That's one of our challenges is to learn from the past in a way that'll be helpful to us. And making that kind of switch is a challenge. I thought the point you made that some of these crops were so many thousands of years old, that people have been working at this a long time. How the olives went across the world, that was really quite interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a question, that I sit here, rather than over there, and I always wonder, aside from informing myself and being involved in trying to inform others, what I could do personally or institutionally. I wonder, anybody have any thoughts about that? What we can do from here? I know that a number of us have been to the Arva Institute, and that's certainly a link that we can continue to cultivate. But are there things practically that a congregation like Beth Am could do?
Well, just as Baltimore has a quote sister city. We as a little association could talk to another association, that institute that you mentioned, or they might have an outreach program, or at least learn what they're doing. Their programs would be interesting just to know what they are.
Does the JNF, besides planting trees, do they? I know that they're involved in a number of infrastructure projects in Israel. I wonder if they're supporting proper water and energy management types of projects. And well, I'll stop there.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, the simple answer is yes, but I don't know the details. And
Actually, there was a project that Beth Am did. I have a little videotape of it. We funded a water capture facility in Israel, and I have a little video about it. I remember seeing it, and they said thank you to Beth Am. Now, maybe it's one of those situations where the plaque said thank you to Beth Am, and then another shul comes in and they take that sign off and they bring another sign in. Thank you to Temple Emmanuel. Like they did in the old movie, remember, on Exodus? That was the scene. But I'll look for that, and I'll see if I can find it. The little video about the Israeli, the Beth Am sponsored project, water capture project in Israel. Maybe someone remembers it.
We don't have an official chair for this meeting, but I'll turn to the chair of our environment team if you want to give us any closing words.
Well, past several years, we've tried to do something on significant and meaningful on Tu B'Shvat. And I hope that everyone who is listening in and participating has enjoyed this year's effort. I know it's really easy to come up with pessimistic news about what's happening in the climate change world, but it's only going to get better by our individual and collective efforts. That's all I've got to say. So one of the things I'm going to send out shortly the minutes of our last meeting. One of the things that the environmental team is pushing for is to promote community solar energy, community solar electric energy among Beth Am members. And that will, you'll be hearing more about that in the next month or two. And the next environmental team meeting will be the middle of March.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for doing this program tonight. It really was very interesting. You really got to give you credit for it.
Well, thank you all for sharing this time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.